She was the daughter of a billionaire, living in a mansion filled with every luxury money could buy. But despite all the toys, the clothes, and the endless riches, there was one strange detail that no one could ignore. This little girl never slept with the lights off. Night after night, every lamp in her enormous bedroom had to stay glowing, because the moment darkness came, she would scream, cry, and refuse to close her eyes. For years, her father and the staff thought it was just a spoiled habit, an odd behavior of a child who had grown too used to getting everything she wanted. But everything changed the day a new maid entered her life. Unlike the others, she was patient, kind, and curious enough to ask why. And what she discovered behind Emily's fear was a shocking truth that no amount of money could ever hide. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Emily was born into a very rich family, but her life began with something very sad. Her mother Grace died while giving birth to her. Emily never had the chance to know her or hear her voice. Her father, Richard, was a billionaire who had everything money could buy, but when his wife died, something changed in him. He didn't know how to deal with the pain, so he worked all the time to keep himself distracted. He didn't spend much time at home, and when he did, he barely looked at Emily. People outside their home thought she had a perfect life, with a big house, expensive things, and a famous last name. But inside, she was just a little girl growing up without her mom and without her dad's love. Even though she was always surrounded by things, she was very lonely. Her life looked beautiful from the outside, but inside, it felt empty from the very beginning. As Emily started to grow, her world was filled with beautiful toys, colorful dresses, and fancy furniture. Her bedroom was huge, filled with stuffed animals, dolls, books, and decorations that looked like they belonged in a castle. But no matter how many things she had, something important was missing. Someone to hold her when she cried, someone to sing to her before bed. The house had many rooms, but they felt cold and quiet. There were always servants around, nannies, cooks, cleaners, but they changed all the time. Emily could never get close to them. Just when she started trusting one, they would be gone, and someone new would take their place. Her father thought he was giving her everything she needed, but he didn't understand that love and time were more important than money. She often sat alone in her big room, wondering what her mother had been like and wishing she could see her, even just once. Emily became used to the silence of the house, but it never felt right. The only voices she heard were those of people hired to take care of her, but they didn't really know her. They followed orders and made sure she was clean, fed, and dressed, but they didn't sit down to talk to her or play with her for very long. The few times her father was home, he would ask if she was doing okay, but he seemed far away, as if his mind was still thinking about work. She always nodded yes, even if she didn't mean it, because she knew he didn't really want to hear more. Emily learned to keep her feelings inside. Sometimes she would look at her reflection in the mirror and try to imagine her mother standing behind her, brushing her hair. She tried to make up stories about her mother's smile and laugh. It was the only way she could feel close to someone she had never met. Nights were the hardest for Emily. When the sun went down and the house grew dark and quiet, she felt the weight of being alone. She couldn't fall asleep unless all the lights were on. It wasn't just a fear of the dark, it was a fear of the emptiness, the silence, and the shadows that reminded her of everything she didn't have. Every night, she asked the staff to leave the lamps on. Some questioned it at first, but she insisted, and after a while they stopped asking. With the lights on, she could imagine someone was there, maybe her mother watching over her, but even then, her sleep was never peaceful. She often woke up in the middle of the night sweating, her heart beating fast, unsure of what had scared her. She would sit up and look around the room, trying to remind herself that she was safe. but the feeling of safety never really came. As Emily got older, she didn't grow out of her need for the lights. Other kids her age might have been going to sleepovers, playing outside, or laughing with their parents. Emily stayed home in her large but empty world. At school, she didn't talk much. Some of her classmates were curious about her because they knew her father was rich, but Emily didn't let anyone get too close. She felt like no one could understand what her life was like. How could she explain that she had everything but still felt like she had nothing? She started writing in notebooks, short stories, imaginary adventures, and drawings. In these stories, she gave herself a different life, one where her mother was alive and her father smiled. It was her way of escaping for a little while. Still, no matter how much she wrote, the real world never changed. Her house remained quiet, her father remained distant, and her heart remained heavy. Throughout those early years, Emily began to realize that money could never fix what was broken. She'd been given a life of luxury, but it came without the love that most children need. The truth was, she would have traded all the toys, clothes, and gifts for one real hug from her mother or one honest conversation with her father. She had learned to smile when needed, to answer politely when spoken to, and to hide her sadness deep inside. No one around her noticed that she was hurting, and maybe they didn't want to notice. They thought that since she had everything, she must be fine. But Emily knew the truth. She was just a girl who had been left with too many things and not enough love. And each night, as the lights stayed on and she lay awake in her big bed, she waited for a peace that never came, falling asleep only when her body gave up from the weight of another day alone. By the time Emily turned 7, her fear of darkness was no longer seen as something small or childish. It had become a fixed rule in her life, something that could not be ignored or easily changed. Every night before bedtime, she would demand that all the lights in her room stay on. If anyone dared to switch them off, she would scream and cry until her voice cracked. Sometimes she would run to the corner of the room, covering her head with her arms. Other times she would sit on her bed with her knees pulled up, refusing to sleep until the light returned. At first, Richard thought it was a normal phase, something all children went through, and he believed it would stop eventually. But it didn't. It grew stronger. The staff began whispering about it in hallways, rolling their eyes or shaking their heads, calling it an addiction to light, or saying she was spoiled beyond reason. This routine continued every single night. Emily's demands became predictable, but also exhausting for the people around her. Some maids tried to negotiate, telling her they would leave just a small lamp on, but she always refused. A single lamp was not enough. She needed every corner of the room bright. Her fear was not just about the dark itself. It was about the feeling that something terrible was waiting for her when the shadows came. No one saw this because no one asked. Instead, they sighed loudly or scolded her, telling her to grow up. Richard grew frustrated too. He spent most of his time at work, but when he was home, he would snap at her, saying she was making a scene for no reason. Emily never argued back. She would just sit there, crying quietly, hugging her knees to her chest as if holding herself together. To everyone else, she was just being difficult, but inside she felt trapped. The whispers among the staff became crueler over time. Some said she was just spoiled because she had no mother to teach her discipline. Others laughed, calling her the little princess who can't stand the dark. Emily overheard some of these comments when she passed by hallways or when she sat behind doors. Each word cut her deeply, but she never responded. She didn't know how to explain what she felt. She didn't have the words to tell anyone why the darkness terrified her so much. She only knew that when the lights went out, her body would freeze. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, only cry silently. Her heart would pound and she would feel like she couldn't breathe. It wasn't a game. It wasn't about getting her way. It was real fear, a kind she couldn't control, but no one saw that. They only saw a girl who demanded lights as if it were a luxury, not a desperate need. Some nights were worse than others. Sometimes a maid would forget to leave a lamp on or would turn the lights off by mistake, thinking Emily had fallen asleep. The moment the room went dark, Emily would wake up screaming. Her voice would echo through the halls, and she would shake violently until someone came running to turn the lights back on. After these episodes, she would sit up for hours, too scared to close her eyes again. The next morning, she would be tired and pale, but no one comforted her. The maids looked at her with annoyance, and her father's face grew colder. He started sending her to bed with warnings instead of kisses or kind words. "If you don't stop this nonsense, Emily, I won't tolerate it," he would say before walking out. She would nod, but as soon as he left, her eyes filled with tears because she knew she couldn't stop, no matter how much she wanted to. Emily's fear shaped her daily life too. At school, she was quieter than other children. She didn't talk about her nights, but she was always tired. Her teachers thought she stayed up late playing with toys or watching television, but that wasn't the truth. She stayed up late because she couldn't sleep in peace, always watching the corners of her room, even with the lights on. When her classmates invited her to sleepovers, she refused, making up excuses. She didn't want anyone to see how afraid she was. She also didn't want to risk being in a dark room somewhere else. This secret made her feel even lonelier. She wanted to tell someone, but she didn't trust anyone enough. Even the notebooks she wrote in didn't hold the full truth. In her drawings, she would sketch big dark shapes around a small figure of a girl. It was her way of showing her fear without words, but nobody noticed what the pictures meant. Yet inside Emily, the real reason for her fear remained. It was not about spoiled behavior, not about wanting attention, and not about being stubborn. It was about the emptiness she had felt since the day she was born. Without a mother, without a father's warmth, the dark felt like a living thing to her, a place where all her sadness stayed hidden and waited to swallow her. She had a wound inside her heart that no one could see, a wound that felt bigger whenever the lights went out. But because no one asked, no one knew, she looked like a stubborn little girl to everyone on the outside, but in reality, she was still carrying a secret pain she couldn't name. Each night, as the room stayed bright and she hugged her knees tightly, tears rolled down her face. Emily felt the same heavy fear again and again, a secret wound still bleeding, unseen by anyone around her. One spring morning, Richard decided to hire a new maid. The old one had quit without notice, saying the job was too much. She wasn't the first to leave like that. Over the years, many maids had come and gone. Some lasted weeks, others only days. They all seemed kind at first, but soon lost their patience with Emily's habits, especially her fear of the dark. This time, the new maid's name was Olivia. She arrived early, wearing a simple uniform and holding a small suitcase. Her eyes were calm, and her smile seemed real, not forced. She didn't seem nervous like most new maids did. When she met Richard, she greeted him politely, and he gave her the usual instructions: basic cleaning, meal help, and looking after Emily. He didn't mention the fear of darkness, as if he had grown tired of repeating it. Olivia nodded and got to work right away. She walked through the house, learning her duties, but also quietly observing everything around her. Emily noticed Olivia on the first day. She watched her from behind doors, corners, and stair railings. After so many staff changes, Emily had stopped trying to make connections. People always left. They either grew angry with her or just got bored and moved on. So when Olivia arrived, Emily didn't say much. She simply stared, trying to figure out what kind of person she was. Olivia, on the other hand, didn't force conversation. She cleaned gently, spoke softly to the cooks and other workers, and smiled at Emily whenever their eyes met. She didn't talk about her rich father, or comment on how big the house was, or ask why Emily looked so serious all the time. She just treated her like any other child. That was strange for Emily. It didn't feel fake. When Olivia passed her in the hallway and said, "Good morning, Emily," It wasn't in a cold or tired voice. It was kind, and it felt honest. Later that afternoon, Olivia brought Emily a snack without being asked. It was a simple sandwich and some fruit, not fancy desserts or anything expensive. She placed it gently on the table and said, "You don't have to eat it now, just if you're hungry." Then she walked away, not waiting for praise or thanks. Emily looked at the plate and then looked at Olivia, who was now dusting the shelves across the room. There was something different about her. She wasn't trying too hard, and she wasn't avoiding her either. She didn't seem scared of Emily's silence or her habits. Emily didn't touch the food right away, but later she ate it, and when Olivia came back and saw the empty plate, she just smiled and gave a small nod. That moment stayed in Emily's mind. It was small, but it mattered. Olivia wasn't like the others. She didn't push. She didn't ignore. She stayed present in a quiet, calm way. That night, Richard told Olivia to handle Emily's bedtime. He said it quickly, not looking up from his tablet. "She's a handful. Just make sure she's in bed and try to turn the lights off. If she screams, leave them on." Olivia didn't ask questions. She just nodded and walked upstairs. Emily was already in bed, sitting under the covers with her arms around her legs. She looked at Olivia as she entered the room, unsure of what to expect. Olivia smiled and walked over slowly. She didn't speak loudly or move too fast. She placed the blanket gently around Emily's feet and said, "Are you comfortable?" Emily nodded once. Then Olivia reached toward the light switch. The moment her hand moved, Emily's eyes widened. A second later, she screamed. It wasn't a small scream. It was loud, sharp, and filled with panic. Olivia froze in place. She didn't keep going. She didn't roll her eyes. She turned back toward Emily and stepped away from the switch. Emily was shaking. Her breath was uneven, and tears were already falling from her eyes. She had screamed louder than she had in months. Usually, after such a moment, the maids would sigh loudly, leave the room, or mumble something about her being spoiled. But Olivia didn't do any of that. She sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at Emily, not with judgment, but with concern. "I'm not going to turn it off," she said quietly. "I'm here. You're safe." She didn't try to touch her or ask her to explain. She just sat there waiting. Slowly, Emily's crying slowed down. Her breathing started to return to normal. She looked at Olivia, still afraid, but confused too. No one had ever reacted like that. No one had ever paused. Olivia didn't act like someone annoyed or scared. She looked like someone who truly wanted to understand. Emily didn't say anything, but she didn't pull away either. Olivia stayed by Emily's side until she was fully calm. She didn't rush, didn't leave the room quickly, and didn't act like it was just a job to finish. She sat quietly, not talking unless Emily looked at her. When she did speak, her voice was always low and steady. "I'll stay here for a little while, okay?" she said. Emily nodded slowly, still curled under her blanket. Olivia didn't ask about the lights again. She didn't try to fix the fear or tell Emily it was silly. She just accepted it, and that made all the difference. For the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel ashamed. She didn't feel like a problem to be solved. She felt noticed, not for her last name, not for her fear, but for being a person. As the minutes passed, Emily's eyes grew heavy. She finally fell asleep with all the lights on, but this time she wasn't scared. Olivia was there, and that changed everything. For the first time, Emily felt like someone wasn't annoyed by her fear, but curious to understand it. That small difference meant everything. Olivia hadn't said much, but her actions showed more care than anyone else had in years. She didn't treat Emily like the billionaire's daughter or a spoiled girl with a strange habit. She treated her like a scared child who needed someone to listen. That night marked a quiet but important change. Emily didn't know what would happen the next day or if Olivia would stay for long, but something inside her felt a little different. She didn't feel alone in her fear anymore. Someone had seen it and stayed beside her. As Olivia sat quietly in the chair beside the bed, watching over her without making her feel watched, Emily slept a little easier. The room was still bright, but it didn't feel so cold. And for once, her fear didn't feel like a burden someone wanted to get rid of. Over the following days, Olivia became Emily's favorite person in the entire mansion. From the very first morning after the bedtime incident, Emily felt safer when Olivia was nearby. She watched her carefully at first, still unsure if she would turn out like all the others. But Olivia's behavior never changed. She stayed patient, calm, and kind. She invited Emily to sit with her at breakfast, asked what she liked to eat, and even encouraged her to talk about her toys. No one had ever really asked Emily those things before. When Olivia had time between her chores, she played small games with Emily, simple ones that made her laugh. Sometimes they read books together, with Olivia using funny voices to bring the characters alive. Emily's laughter echoed in the halls, something rare in the house. The other servants noticed the difference, but kept their distance. To Emily, Olivia didn't feel like staff. She felt like someone who truly cared. As the days passed, Emily started looking forward to Olivia's presence. She would peek around corners, waiting for her to arrive with a smile. At mealtimes, she would eat more when Olivia sat nearby because it made her feel comfortable. Olivia also told her simple stories from her own life, nothing exaggerated, just small events about when she was a child or about her younger brother. Emily listened carefully, fascinated by the way Olivia described things in such a natural way. It made her realize that not everyone grew up in giant houses with maids and drivers. She began to ask questions, something she rarely did with anyone else. Olivia never made her feel silly for asking. Instead, she explained patiently, always using words Emily could understand. Bit by bit, Emily felt something inside her opening, like a door she had locked for a long time. She didn't notice it herself, but she was beginning to trust again. It wasn't easy for Emily to share her thoughts, but Olivia gave her the space she needed. She never forced her to talk. Instead, she created moments where Emily could speak freely if she wanted. One afternoon, they were sitting by the window, looking outside at the garden. Emily quietly said, "I don't like when people leave." Olivia turned to her, listening closely, but didn't push for more. She just said, "I understand. It hurts when that happens." That simple response made Emily feel less alone. She had never heard an adult answer like that before. Most people ignored her words or brushed them aside. Encouraged by Olivia's reaction, Emily began to share more, little by little. She spoke about her toys, her favorite colors, her dreams at night, and even her fears. These words had been kept inside for years, but now they were coming out, piece by piece. Olivia treated every word with respect, as if they truly mattered. Nighttime remained the hardest part of Emily's days. The fear of darkness never left her, but with Olivia nearby, it felt a little less overwhelming. One evening, after a long day, Olivia went upstairs to help Emily prepare for bed. Emily didn't resist this time. She brushed her teeth, changed into her nightclothes, and climbed under the blanket without complaints. But when Olivia reached to leave, Emily quickly grabbed her hand. Her grip was tight, almost desperate. "Don't go," Emily whispered. "Don't turn it off." Her voice trembled with fear, but also with hope that Olivia would understand. Olivia didn't hesitate. She nodded softly and sat back down in the chair by the bed. She didn't move her hand away. Emily kept holding on, her small fingers wrapped tightly around Olivia's. The light stayed on, the room remained bright, and for once Emily didn't feel like she was fighting her fear alone. Someone was there with her. Olivia stayed by Emily's side until her eyes grew heavy. She hummed softly, not a song with words, but a simple tune, steady and calm. Emily found comfort in the sound. She stared at the light on the ceiling for a while, but then turned her gaze to Olivia, who smiled at her warmly. "You're safe," Olivia said. "I'll be here." Emily nodded and closed her eyes for the first time that night. It didn't take long for sleep to come, though her grip on Olivia's hand didn't loosen until her body finally relaxed. Olivia didn't leave immediately. She stayed a little longer, watching over her. This was something none of the other maids had ever done. They had always rushed to finish the task and leave, but Olivia was different. She didn't see Emily's fear as a problem. She saw it as a wound that needed care, and she was willing to stay with her through it. Unlike the other maids, Olivia didn't see Emily's condition as misbehavior. She didn't see it as stubbornness, nor did she believe the whispers that Emily was spoiled. She saw the fear for what it was, something real and heavy that Emily couldn't fight alone. Each night she stayed with her. Each time she listened without judgment, the bond between them grew stronger. Emily didn't understand it fully yet, but she could feel something changing in her heart. The loneliness she had carried for so long wasn't as sharp when Olivia was near. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. Olivia's patience, her gentle words, and her willingness to stay made all the difference. A fragile but powerful bond was forming between them, one that Emily had never experienced with anyone before. Without realizing it, Emily was beginning to trust again, and in doing so, she started to fill her heart with something she thought she had lost forever. One evening, Olivia sat with Emily on the floor of her large bedroom, helping her organize the many toys scattered everywhere. There were dolls, stuffed animals, puzzles and blocks, enough to cover half the carpet. Most of them had been given as gifts over the years, but Emily rarely touched them. Tonight, though, she seemed more comfortable with Olivia there, and for once she picked up the dolls and arranged them carefully in a row. Olivia encouraged her by asking gentle questions, like which ones were her favorite and what names she had chosen for them. Emily answered quietly, but with more honesty than usual. As she reached for another doll, she looked at Olivia and softly said, "Mommy, can you hand me that one?" The word came out naturally, without hesitation. Olivia froze where she was sitting, startled by the sound of it. Emily, however, kept speaking as if nothing unusual had happened, her small hands busy with the toys. Olivia's heart skipped, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. The word "mommy" hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She looked at Emily, who continued to play, completely unaware of what she had said. It didn't sound forced or deliberate. It was like a slip, a piece of something buried inside Emily that had come out without thought. Olivia realized that Emily hadn't noticed at all, that she had spoken the word as though it naturally belonged. Olivia thought about correcting her, about gently saying her real name, but something stopped her. She understood what this moment meant. Emily had never known a mother's embrace, never had someone who stayed by her side at night or gave her the comfort she craved. Without realizing it, Emily was finding that in her. Olivia's chest tightened. She wasn't Emily's mother, and she never could be, but right now she mattered to the girl in a way no one else did. The evening continued quietly, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of what had just happened. She watched Emily closely, seeing how natural the slip had been. Emily asked her to sit beside her while she played with the dolls, and Olivia did, though her mind was still on the word. Emily laughed softly when arranging the toys, a sound Olivia had only begun to hear in recent days. Olivia stayed calm, responding to her questions, but inside her emotions swirled. She knew that Emily was not confused. She wasn't mistaking her for Grace. She was simply giving a name to the feeling she had inside, the comfort of being cared for, the warmth she had longed for all her life. Olivia thought about how lonely the child must have been and how strong that emptiness had grown over the years. By calling her Mommy, Emily wasn't asking for perfection. She was asking for something simple, someone who made her feel loved and safe. That night, when bedtime came, the usual routine began again. Emily climbed into her large bed, clinging to the blanket nervously, her eyes already darting to the corners of the room. The lamp stayed on, and Olivia was there as always, but this time felt different. Emily didn't just demand that the lights remain. She also reached out her hand for Olivia to hold. "Don't go," she whispered, her eyes pleading. Olivia sat down on the edge of the bed, holding her small hand firmly. She remembered the word from earlier, the slip that revealed so much. Olivia's heart ached in that moment. She couldn't give Emily her mother back. She couldn't replace what had been taken from her at birth. But she could be here now as someone steady and real. She stayed by her side, not moving, letting Emily drift into sleep slowly, her breathing growing calmer with Olivia's hand still wrapped around hers. Olivia didn't leave after Emily's eyes closed. She stayed in the room, watching her sleep under the glow of the lamps. For the first time, Emily seemed to fall asleep more peacefully, without the sudden jerks of fear that usually shook her awake. Her face looked softer, calmer, almost free. Olivia felt a deep sadness, but also a sense of responsibility. She knew she was not meant to stay forever. Servants always came and went, and she might not be different in that sense, but the way Emily looked at her, the way she had spoken that word, showed that something important was happening. Olivia realized Emily wasn't asking her to replace Grace. The child wasn't asking for a perfect mother, just for someone who cared enough to stay. Olivia whispered softly, even though Emily couldn't hear her. "You're safe, little one. I'll stay tonight." And she kept her promise, staying until the house was silent and steady. Olivia's heart ached because she understood the truth. She could never replace Grace, the woman Emily had never known but had lost before she even had the chance to love her. Still, Olivia saw clearly what Emily was really searching for. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't someone flawless or untouchable. Emily was searching for something far simpler: love. She needed someone who would not leave, someone who would not laugh at her fears, someone who would not turn away when she asked for comfort. Olivia felt the weight of it, but she also accepted it. From that night forward, she promised herself that as long as she was here, she would give Emily what she could. She would not turn off the light. She would not walk away when Emily asked her to stay. She would give her love, even in small ways. And in that moment, Emily unknowingly found a piece of what had always been missing from her nights. Richard began noticing changes in his daughter. For years, Emily had been quiet, distant, and afraid. But now there was something different in her. She smiled more often, and sometimes he even heard her laugh when he walked past her room. At meals, she ate with less hesitation, and when she walked through the halls, there was a lighter step to her movements. At first he was pleased, thinking maybe she was finally growing out of her strange habits, but soon something else caught his attention. One afternoon, as he walked by Emily's bedroom door, he heard her voice clearly. She was calling Olivia, not by her name, but by another word. "Mommy," she said softly with the same tone a child would use for their mother. Richard froze in place, his chest tightening. The sound struck him in a way he couldn't describe. Grace had been gone since the moment Emily was born, and now that word felt like both a gift and a wound. At first, Richard felt angry. The word belonged to Grace, the woman he had loved deeply and lost far too soon. To hear Emily giving that title to someone else made him feel as though Grace's memory was being replaced. It seemed wrong, even disloyal, that his daughter could call another woman by the name reserved for her mother. The thought grew inside him until he could no longer ignore it. That evening, when Emily had gone to bed, he asked Olivia to meet him in his office. His tone was sharp, and his expression carried the weight of his frustration. When Olivia entered, she stood quietly, waiting for him to speak. Richard didn't waste time. He demanded to know why Emily had started calling her "Mommy," his voice firm and full of accusation. To him, it seemed like Olivia had encouraged it, that she had stepped into a role she had no right to claim. Olivia listened carefully, her eyes steady. She didn't flinch at his anger or try to defend herself with excuses. Instead, she spoke gently, her voice calm but firm. She explained that she had never once asked Emily to call her that, nor had she hinted at such a thing. The word had simply slipped out of Emily's mouth one day, naturally, without thought. Olivia told him she understood the weight of the name and respected the memory of Grace. She wasn't trying to take her place, but she also reminded Richard of something important. Emily had never known what it felt like to be held by a mother, never felt safe enough to rest her fears in someone's arms. That longing had lived inside her all her life. When she called Olivia Mommy, it wasn't because she wanted to replace Grace. It was because she was finally finding comfort. Olivia's words were steady, filled with both compassion and truth. Richard sat back in his chair, silent. Her explanation pierced through his anger, leaving behind something harder to face: sorrow. He thought about all the years he had buried himself in work, convincing himself that success and money would be enough to protect Emily. He had filled the house with toys, clothes, and stuff, but none of it had given her what she needed. The truth was in front of him now. Emily hadn't been searching for wealth. She had been searching for love. The realization made his chest heavy. He thought of the times he had rushed through their short conversations, barely looking at her before leaving for work. He thought of her birthdays, where expensive gifts replaced his presence. And now, here was Olivia, someone who had simply stayed, listened, and cared. That was all Emily had wanted. Someone to hold her hand when she was afraid, someone to sit with her in the silence of night. His first instinct was still to feel jealous, as if Olivia had taken something that should belong only to him and Grace. But as he thought longer, he realized it wasn't about being replaced. Grace would always be Emily's mother, even if she had never been there. Olivia hadn't stolen that place. She had filled a space Richard himself had left empty. He struggled with the truth, torn between pride and regret. He had always believed his way of protecting Emily was the right one, building walls of wealth and security. Yet he was now seeing that his daughter had grown up in a house full of light, but also full of loneliness. Olivia had stepped into that gap, not as Grace's replacement, but as a presence Emily could trust. Richard saw it clearly for the first time. His daughter needed more than material comfort. She needed real closeness, something he hadn't given her in years. Richard listened to Olivia's words, torn between anger and sorrow, but unable to deny the truth. For years, he had hidden from his pain, convincing himself that working harder was the only way to move forward. But in doing so, he had left Emily to face her fears alone. The sight of her smiling again, the sound of her laughter, and even the word "mommy" were proof that she was healing in a way money could never provide. Richard's heart ached with guilt, but also with a strange sense of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late to learn from this, to step back into his daughter's life with more than just wealth. As he sat there, Olivia's calm explanation lingering in his mind, he realized what Emily truly wanted. She didn't want riches. She didn't want gifts. She wanted presence. She wanted someone to hold her hand in the silence of night, and that was something he could no longer ignore. Olivia, determined to understand Emily's fear, began asking tender questions. She didn't rush or demand answers. Instead, she created moments when Emily could feel safe enough to share what she carried inside. During bedtime, when Emily was calmer and holding her hand, Olivia would gently ask, "What makes the dark so hard for you?" Or, "Has something ever happened that made you afraid?" Emily didn't answer right away. She often stayed silent, turning her face toward the blanket. But Olivia didn't push. She stayed beside her, showing through patience that she was ready to listen whenever Emily was ready to speak. Night after night, Olivia repeated her quiet reassurance, reminding Emily that she didn't have to be afraid with her there. Slowly, the walls Emily had built began to weaken. Her eyes held hesitation, but also a longing to finally tell someone. Then, one quiet night, when the lights glowed softly in the room, Emily whispered words she had never spoken before. She confessed that years ago, something had happened while her father was away on one of his long trips. Richard had hired another caretaker to look after her, one of the many women who came and went through the mansion. But this one was different. She was strict, cold, and impatient with Emily's fear of the dark. That night, Emily had begged for the lights to stay on, but the caretaker grew frustrated. She told her to stop being spoiled, turned off the switch, and shut the door tightly. Emily remembered her small hands pounding against the wood, her voice screaming until it hurt. But no one came. The woman ignored her completely, letting her cries echo into the silence. Hours passed in unbearable fear. The room seemed endless, every shadow turning into a threat. Emily felt forgotten. She felt invisible. Most of all, she felt sure that nobody would ever come back for her again. As she told the story, Emily's body trembled. She described the sound of her own crying, how her voice grew weaker as time stretched on. She said she thought maybe she had disappeared, that maybe the world had moved on without her. Her small, frightened words carried years of silence. For Emily, that night had carved something deep inside her, a wound that never healed. She explained how, from that moment forward, she couldn't stand the dark. It wasn't just darkness anymore. It had become the same as being abandoned, as being unloved, as being left behind forever. Olivia held her hand tightly as she spoke, her chest heavy with emotion. She realized how much Emily had been carrying alone all these years. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't spoiled behavior. It was trauma. A memory so powerful that it shaped every night of Emily's life since. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she listened, her heart breaking with every detail. Olivia finally understood that Emily's fear was not about the absence of light, but about the absence of love. The night of abandonment had changed everything for her, embedding terror in her young autistic mind, which was already sensitive to sudden changes and overwhelming fear. For Emily, darkness wasn't just shadows. It was proof that she didn't matter, that people could leave and never return. Olivia felt anger rise toward the woman who had ignored Emily's desperate cries. How could someone be so cruel to a child already struggling with loss and loneliness? But alongside the anger was sorrow. Olivia wished she could erase that night from Emily's memory, wished she could go back in time and sit by her side so she would never feel that level of fear. She brushed Emily's hair softly and whispered, "I believe you. It wasn't your fault." Those words brought a tiny relief to Emily, who had waited years to hear them. For Emily, sharing the truth was both painful and relieving. She had hidden it for so long, believing no one would listen or care. Now, sitting with Olivia, she felt a sense of release. The tears came freely, but they didn't feel as heavy as before. Olivia stayed with her the entire time, never letting go of her hand, never turning her face away. For the first time, Emily didn't feel judged. She didn't feel like a problem to be solved. She felt seen. Olivia assured her that her fear made sense, that anyone would be afraid if they were left alone like that. Emily's shoulders loosened, as if a weight had lifted just by being understood. The room was still bright, but something inside Emily felt lighter too. Speaking the truth didn't erase the memory, but it helped her see that she wasn't crazy for feeling the way she did. She was simply a child who had been hurt. Olivia's heart broke at the story, but she also felt clarity. Everything made sense now. Emily wasn't afraid of the dark itself. She was afraid of being abandoned, of being erased from someone's memory, just like the mother she never met and the caretaker who had shut the door that night. The truth explained every scream, every sleepless night, every desperate demand to keep the lights on. Olivia hugged her gently, letting Emily rest against her. She didn't promise that the fear would disappear overnight because she knew trauma didn't vanish so easily, but she promised that she would stay, that Emily would never have to face the dark alone again. Olivia whispered, "You are not forgotten. You never will be." Emily closed her eyes, holding on to those words as if they were a shield. For the first time in years, she felt hope, because at last, someone understood the hidden scar that had ruled her life. When Olivia shared Emily's secret with Richard, his face turned pale. He had expected some explanation for Emily's strange habit, but he never imagined it would be something so cruel. Olivia told him gently, choosing her words carefully, but every detail pierced him like a blade. The story of how a caretaker had locked Emily in the dark, ignoring her cries, painted a picture he could not bear to see. Richard sat in silence, his hands pressed against his face, as though trying to hide from the truth. He thought of all the years he had dismissed Emily's fear as spoiled behavior, and shame burned inside him. He realized now that he hadn't just misunderstood her, he had failed her. His absence, his endless focus on business, had left her unprotected. He could not deny it anymore. The wealth he thought would shield her from pain had instead left her vulnerable to the cruelty and neglect of others. The crushing weight of guilt sank into Richard's chest. He had always believed he was doing the best he could by working hard and providing everything money could buy. But as Olivia's words echoed in his mind, he saw how wrong he had been. Toys, clothes, and servants could never replace love. He had been physically alive in Emily's life, but emotionally absent. In his grief for Grace, he had buried himself in business deals, trips, and meetings, leaving his daughter behind. And in those empty spaces, Emily's wounds had grown deeper. He remembered the times when she cried at night and he told the staff to handle it. He remembered her birthdays, where expensive gifts replaced time spent together. Now he understood that every missed moment, every absence, had taught Emily one thing: that she was alone. His fortune felt worthless compared to the pain in his daughter's eyes. For the first time, Richard felt truly powerless. That night, Richard couldn't rest. He walked through the halls of the mansion, replaying Olivia's words in his mind. His footsteps echoed in the silence, and for once he noticed how cold and empty the house truly felt. Every corner reminded him of the distance between him and his daughter. He stopped outside Emily's door, his hand hovering over the handle. Weeks had passed since he last entered her room. Usually he avoided it, leaving the task to the staff, telling himself he was too busy. But tonight felt different. He knew he couldn't hide anymore. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside, the lamps glowed warmly, casting light across the room. Emily lay in bed, clutching her blanket, her eyes wide open even though it was late. When she saw him step inside, her face showed confusion. Richard walked closer, his heart heavy but determined. For the first time in weeks, he was choosing to be present. Richard sat by her bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. His hands trembled as he rested them on his knees, unsure of what to say. Emily stared at him, as if trying to decide if he was real or just another fleeting moment. "I'm here," Richard whispered, his voice unsteady. The words felt simple, but to him they carried everything he hadn't said for years. He had never told her he was sorry. He had never told her she wasn't alone. But tonight, in those two words, he was trying to say it all. Emily blinked, her small face filled with hesitation. Slowly, she leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against him. Richard froze, afraid to move and break the fragile connection. Then, as if testing if it was safe, Emily rested her head against his arm. The gesture was small, but it struck him harder than any business victory ever could. Emily's body was tense at first, as though she wasn't sure if he would stay. Richard stayed still, letting her lean on him without pulling away. He could feel her tiny breaths against his sleeve, each one reminding him of how long she had been without this closeness. He thought of Grace, the wife he had lost, and how she would have wanted him to be better for their child. Tears filled his eyes, but he held them back, not wanting to scare Emily. For years, he had been afraid of facing her pain because it reminded him of his own. But now, sitting here with her leaning against him, he realized avoiding it had only made it worse. Emily didn't push him away. She didn't cry. She simply stayed there, her head resting on him, as if she was giving him one last chance to prove he wouldn't leave again. Richard's chest tightened, but he stayed. For Richard, that moment was both painful and healing. Painful because he realized just how much time had already been lost, years he could never get back. Healing because Emily, despite everything, was still willing to let him in. Her trust was fragile, but it wasn't gone. Richard sat with her until her eyelids grew heavy, the light still glowing across the room. When her breathing slowed and her small hand brushed against his sleeve, he whispered again, "I'm here." This time he didn't say it to convince himself. It was a promise. For the first time in a long time, he felt like a father, not a provider, not a businessman, but a father. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could fight to change the future. And in that quiet night, with Emily leaning against him, Richard believed that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to start over and finally give her what she needed. From then on, Richard tried to be present. It wasn't easy for him. His entire life had been built around power, meetings, contracts, and endless hours at the office. Habits like that don't disappear in a day. Sometimes he still found himself reaching for his phone while sitting beside Emily, tempted to check emails or answer calls. But each time, he remembered her face the night she leaned against him, and he put the phone down. Every evening, no matter how late he came home, he forced himself to step into her room. Emily looked at him with cautious eyes at first, expecting him to disappear again. But he stayed. He sat in the chair or on the edge of her bed, awkward at times but determined. He didn't always know what to say, and sometimes silence filled the space. Yet the difference was clear. He was there, and for Emily, that simple presence mattered more than anything. Olivia noticed the effort Richard was making. She could see he was uncomfortable at times, unsure how to connect with his own daughter. But he was trying, and that was new. Together, they created small rituals that gave Emily a sense of safety. Sometimes Richard would read to her, his voice unsteady at first, but improving with practice. Emily would listen quietly, occasionally correcting him when he misread a word. Other nights, Olivia told short stories while Richard held Emily's hand, letting her feel the comfort of two people staying by her side. The consistency became powerful. Emily began to expect these moments, looking forward to bedtime instead of fearing it. For Olivia, it was rewarding to see father and daughter growing closer. For Richard, it was uncomfortable but also deeply meaningful. He was beginning to understand something that had been missing in his life all along. His daughter didn't need a perfect father. She needed one who stayed. Slowly, small changes appeared in Emily's behavior. The child who once demanded every light in the room remain on began to accept less. At first, she allowed only one lamp to stay bright while the others were dimmed. It still took time, but each step forward was a victory. One night, she whispered that a gentle lamp by her bed was enough. Olivia squeezed her hand, proud of her courage. Richard nearly cried at the sight, realizing how much trust it took for her to accept even a little darkness. These changes weren't forced. They came naturally because Emily felt safe. She no longer believed that darkness meant abandonment. Now she understood that even if the shadows filled the room, someone would be sitting beside her when she opened her eyes. The lights no longer had to fight her fears alone. She had her father and Olivia, and that made the difference she had been waiting for her entire life. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing night. Richard began to understand his daughter's little habits, the way she tapped her fingers when nervous, how she hugged her stuffed rabbit when she needed comfort, or how she relaxed when Olivia hummed softly. He paid attention in ways he had never done before. Emily, in turn, started to open up to him. She asked him questions about his day, about her mother, and about the world outside the mansion. Richard didn't always know how to answer, but he did his best. For the first time, their conversations weren't forced. They were building trust, one small word at a time. Olivia often sat quietly, watching them, her heart full. She had seen Emily broken by loneliness, and now she was seeing her rebuild piece by piece. The house no longer felt like a cold place filled with silence. It was beginning to sound and feel like a home. For Olivia, watching the change was more rewarding than anything she had experienced in her years of work. She had entered this mansion as just another maid, unsure how long she would stay. But now she realized she had become part of something bigger. Emily trusted her, leaned on her, and loved her in a way she hadn't expected. And Richard, once cold and distant, was learning too. Olivia saw his walls slowly crumble as he allowed himself to feel guilt, love, and responsibility all at once. She didn't see herself as Grace's replacement, nor did she want to. Instead, she felt proud to stand beside father and daughter as they rebuilt what had been broken. Every night she watched Emily smile. Every night she saw her fall asleep with less fear. Olivia felt that her presence had meaning. She had helped turn pain into healing, and she knew this bond was something none of them would forget. For Richard, it was a lesson money had never taught him. All his life, he had believed that wealth could fix problems, that success was the answer to grief and loss. But sitting by his daughter's bed, holding her small hand, he realized how wrong he had been. Money could buy lights, toys, and staff, but it could not erase Emily's fear or fill her loneliness. Only love could do that. The nights he spent in her room were worth more than any contract he had ever signed. Slowly, he began to see his daughter in a new way, not as a fragile child to be managed, but as a strong soul who had survived more pain than most adults ever would. Each evening, as Emily drifted to sleep with only a small lamp glowing beside her, Richard felt both pride and regret. Pride that she was healing. Regret that he had waited so long to give her what she truly needed. Over time, Emily's fear no longer defined her life. The terror that once ruled every bedtime slowly became just a part of her story, not the whole of it. She still asked for a small lamp to stay on beside her bed, but it was no longer because she felt trapped or forgotten. Instead, the gentle glow reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore. Each night when she closed her eyes, she knew that Olivia and Richard would still be there in the morning. That security allowed her to sleep more peacefully, without the racing heart and trembling hands that used to haunt her. The difference was clear to everyone in the mansion. The little girl, who once screamed at the sight of shadows, now smiled as she climbed into bed, hugging her stuffed rabbit while listening to the voices of the people she trusted most. The darkness had not disappeared, but it no longer had the power to control her life. Olivia had become Emily's emotional anchor. She was not her biological mother, and Emily understood that, but in her heart, Olivia filled the role she had missed all her life. Olivia treated her with patience and tenderness, not as a spoiled child, but as a person with real feelings and fears. She never dismissed her needs and never left her to face them alone. Emily clung to her naturally, speaking to her about small joys, daily thoughts, and even fears that had once been locked away. They cooked simple meals together, played games on the floor of her room, and shared laughter that echoed through the halls. Olivia gave her something money never could: security in love. For Emily, that was more powerful than any toy or gift she had ever received. Richard, who once feared that Emily's use of the word mommy would erase Grace's memory, slowly came to understand that Olivia's presence was a blessing, not a threat. Richard, humbled by everything he had learned, became more attentive and protective than ever before. He made a promise to himself that he would not repeat his past mistakes. Work still demanded much of his time, but he made sure Emily was no longer pushed aside for meetings or contracts. He began attending her school events, sitting with her at dinner, and taking part in the bedtime rituals with Olivia. At first, his efforts were clumsy. He didn't always know what to say or do, but Emily responded with gratitude to even the smallest gestures. The sight of her father staying to listen to her stories or holding her hand during difficult nights filled her with a sense of safety she had never known. Richard realized that fatherhood was not about perfection or providing wealth. It was about being there. Each night, as he watched Emily lean on Olivia and still reach for him too, Richard understood that their family was becoming something real again. Emily now introduced Olivia proudly as her mommy. It came naturally, with no hesitation or embarrassment. When relatives or visitors asked who Olivia was, Emily stood taller, smiling as she answered. At first, Richard resisted the word, still haunted by the idea that it belonged only to Grace. But he soon realized that Emily wasn't replacing her mother. She was filling a void that had been empty for too long. The word mommy wasn't about erasing Grace's memory. It was about finally experiencing the love she had been denied. Richard came to accept it, not with jealousy, but with gratitude. He was thankful that someone had given Emily what he had failed to provide for years. The bond between Emily and Olivia didn't threaten him, it strengthened their family. He no longer saw Olivia as just a maid, but as a partner in raising his daughter, someone who had stepped in when he had stepped away. The mansion itself began to change. What once felt like a cold palace filled with servants now felt like a home. Rooms that had stood silent were filled with laughter, footsteps, and even the occasional playful mess. Emily's voice, once soft and hidden, now carried through the hallways as she called for her father or Olivia. Meals were shared together at the same table rather than eaten alone in silence. Even the staff noticed the difference, treating Emily with more kindness now that they saw how loved and supported she was. The heavy atmosphere that had once hung over the house was replaced by warmth. For Emily, the greatest change was not the building around her, but the feeling inside her. She no longer dreaded nighttime or feared being forgotten. Instead, she woke each day with the comfort of knowing she was part of something unbreakable. The mansion no longer felt like a cage. It truly felt like home. And every night, as she drifted to sleep, Emily finally felt what she had longed for most. She belonged. She still turned to see the soft light glowing by her bedside, but it was no longer her shield. It was her reminder that she was safe, that she was loved, and that she would never again be left alone in the dark. Olivia often sat with her until her breathing softened, sometimes humming softly, while Richard stayed close, holding her hand or sitting quietly nearby. Emily would close her eyes, knowing that if she woke, she wouldn't find an empty room, but the people who cared for her most. The fears that had once ruled her nights no longer had the same power. In their place was love, steady and real. For the first time in her young life, Emily didn't just feel like a child surrounded by wealth. She felt like a daughter, part of a family she could finally call her own. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.